South Africa's plans to end load shedding have been dealt a heavy blow. Eskom has withdrawn transmission capacity reservations for winners of a tender for emergency power provision, including Karpowership. Now, these projects were selected as preferred bidders in the 2020 Risk Mitigation Independent Power Producer Procurement Program. This is a government initiative aimed at rapidly integrating an additional 2,000 megawatts into the national grid to mitigate load shedding. Now, Karpowership SA was expected to contribute the majority of the capacity, amounting to 1,220 megawatts. Now, to discuss this development further, we are joined virtually by the chairman of the South African Independent Power Producers Association, Brian Day, and a research fellow in energy at the University of Cape Town's Global Risk Governance Program, Hilton Trollip. Gentlemen, great to have both of you. Thank you very, very much for your time.
Greetings. Good morning, Ian. Good morning.
Prof, let me begin with you on this one. I mean, Karpowership and other emergency energy projects having lost the grid connection capacity. For those that haven't necessarily been following, what went wrong? What did they do, and perhaps the implications of this decision now?
So perhaps just, these are fairly complicated processes looking from the outside. So the way that this works is the Department of Mineral Resources and Energy announces a preferred bidder for one of these projects, and then that bidder is given a time period in which to get their act together, to get finance, to get various government approvals. And Karpowership was announced in 2021, in March, and at that stage I think they had to get the approvals by the following year, 2022. But since then there have been a number of delays, and the delays have been in two areas really. Environmental authorizations, but also right from the start, serious questions were asked around the economic rationality or the financial rationality of a 20-year contract, which would oblige Eskom, backed up by government if Eskom didn't honor the power purchase agreement, to buy power, a large amount of power every day from Karpowerships for 20 years, long after load shedding should be over, and at a significantly higher cost than the average cost, including from other dispatchable sources. So those two areas have really dogged the Karpowership process of finalizing, reaching financial close, it's called. And the main one has been, most of the action has been around environmental authorizations. Without going into too much detail, they were given an authorization, it was challenged, it was found to be very defective in a number of respects. It was withdrawn, another special authorization was given, and environmental organizations in November gave notice of their intention to appeal the authorization.
Okay.
This is what has... So I just want to say one thing. I think that the media, unfortunately, have transmitted an inaccurate overall picture that this is an Eskom problem. This is really a Department of Mineral Resources and Energy government and Karpowership problem. And Eskom will sign the PPA if and when it is reasonable to do so.
Okay.
And Eskom itself has to have a look at the PPA.
But I suppose, and Mr. Trollip, let me bring you in here, because at the end of the day, Eskom is where the energy is coming from. So I suppose that's where people take it and have a look at it on face value as opposed to digging deeper. But I mean, the reality is the projects were meant to bring much needed additional generation capacity to the country's power system that would have minimized load shedding. So what is Eskom going to do now to procure emergency power, and how long will this take?
Well, if I may just continue, unfortunately the government has shifted the blame for load shedding onto Eskom, because Eskom is the person that actually brings you the power. But the power is brought to you from power suppliers that are procured by the department, and it's at that stage that the failure is happening. So politically, in my belief, in an election year. We hear it's Eskom, 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 but if you look at the history and if you understand, and I'd be interested actually to hear Brian's take on this, the failures at the government side to procure new power. And Eskom gets blamed, and that's very useful politically, but actually the failure is in the government's power procurement program.
Yeah. Brian, let me bring you in here, because obviously at the end of the day, we need to look at what went wrong with a Karpowership. I mean, this has been such a long and protracted issue, and environmentalists got involved, and I mean, there was so much talk about all of this, but you know, it was last year in December that Eskom asked National Treasury for permission to sign an electricity purchase agreement with Karpowership, really bringing the Turkish company closer to fulfilling this contract to win the supplying South Africa's power grid for more than 2 years. What went wrong in terms of that securing financial closure by the 31st of December 2023?
Yeah, thank you very much for the question, and I fully concur with Hilton's view. It's about integrity of process. The grid connection withdrawal, and I put that in inverted commas, is reported superficially because it's not discretionary action from Eskom. There's what's called a budget quote process where they get granted grid connection, and there are time limits by which time that grid connection needs to be utilised. That has already been extended multiple times. In July of last year, it was extended again to the end of December of last year, and they were told at the time that there would be no further extension. So it's not discretionary action by Eskom. They have actually bent over backwards to extend the grid connection opportunity multiple times. And in the context of expanding grid connection opportunities for the much needed new generation capacity in the system, there are new rules being written so that Eskom can broaden the opportunity but also be very fair, so that if they grant grid connection opportunity, we can know that it will be utilized soon, effectively, cost effectively, to create new generation capacity within the system. And that's where there is really a system failure. It goes to integrity of process. At the moment, of course, you have a new integrated resource plan, which is the mechanism by which government models the supply-demand balance in the system. Unfortunately, even the previous IRP, the acronym for Integrated Resource Plan, was not effectively implemented. There's been significant delays in procurement, and that's really where the problem lies. There are deep concerns, of course, even on the new IRP. Hilton, you did a very good interview a day or two ago. Chris Yelland has done a good one. Anton Eberhardt has done a good one. So those are three very good interviews that we can look at. Just to mention two problems that illustrate the problem with integrity of process. In the current IRP, there's a pre-decision made to in the short term, Horizon 1 up to 2030, to include gas power generation at high utilization. It's the second part of that that's the problem, not the first part. And in Horizon 2, the modelling for a potential high renewable scenario excludes gas, which is incorrect. The whole point of having variable renewables at very cheap costs means that you need battery storage and gas power generation, but at a utilization level somewhere around 10, 20, 30% area to balance when the variable renewables can't provide the very, very cheap power. So there's an integrity of process that is really the problem.
So gentlemen, obviously we're at this position. Sorry, we've got about 2 minutes left of this interview. The decision means that the transmission capacity, which is in short supply, can now be awarded to other shovel-ready projects in terms of its interim and access rules. But my question is, are there any projects that could quickly be added to the grid?
There are a number of projects that are ready, and unfortunately there's a geographical constraint on this as well. I would imagine that there's nothing stopping Karpowerships reapplying for that grid capacity. They would then go into the queue. There would be an assessment of other projects, but it has to be in the locality. If you look back at bid window 6, there are multiple wind projects that are not were not awarded that were going to be shovel ready, and some of those could have been online by now.
Yeah.
So the problem is to adjust the grid connection rules, to implement the curtailment rules. Credit again to Eskom for the forward thinking that they are having in terms of implementing these rules, and that's perhaps a whole other interview on how curtailment and then grid expansion is probably the most important issue to get new generation onto the grid.
Hilton, just quickly, as I wrap up this, I mean, obviously we know the controversy that was around Karpowership, and obviously, as you mentioned, they can enter into this all over again. I mean, this isn't the end of the road for them. But in terms of the reaction, a lot of these environmentalist organizations are very, very happy. But what is your honest opinion and sentiment of Karpowership? Is this perhaps the way that we need to go? Is this what we need?
So I'll always give you my honest opinion, because luckily I don't have a material interest in any of this, and I make that clear. So I can be independent. So Karpowership, the original contract was irrational. 20-year contract was ridiculous. And also there was overwhelming evidence that Karpowership received unreasonable favour from the Department of Mineral Resources and Energy, and they've been sitting like a dog in a manger in this process, preventing much better projects from being connected and dealt with by government. So Karpowerships, they've got a use in certain cases. They can be brought in for 2 or 3 years when there's an emergency to provide power, but that's a separate way of doing things, and South Africa possibly needs a way of assessing such projects, but they need to, the process has to be fair, and as Brian says, this is about integrity of process, and we can't, just because there's load shedding, just connect any old thing and commit the public to massive amounts of long-term expenditure.
Indeed.
So I'm completely in support of Eskom, but I do want to point out that the Department of Mineral Resources and Energy is a bottleneck in the public procurement, but there's lots of private power coming on now for private customers, and they should get access to the grid because they can help avoid load shedding or reduce it.
Hilton Trollip, Research Fellow in Energy at the University of Cape Town's Global Governance Risk Programme, and Brian Day, the Chairman of the South African Independent Power Producers Association, speaking about this decision from Eskom to withdraw transmission capacity reservations, Karpowership and other emergency energy projects.